Hi, I'm Fred Hafer, inventor of the ball cannon. In this video, I'm going to show you how to unpack a ball cannon and how to assemble it. There is some assembly required, but it's a relatively simple process that should only take you 10 to 15 minutes. We think we've provided excellent instructions and illustrations in the user's manual, but thought maybe this video would also be helpful. The first thing you're going to want to do is just grab a couple of your standard household tools, like a slotted screwdriver, a Phillips screwdriver, a box cutter or utility knife, and a heavy-duty scissors, or I'm going to use a wire cutter in this case. So let's get started. First, we'll grab our utility knife and open the box. When you open the box, you should notice that everything is very neatly arranged. If there's anything out of order, again, it might be a sign that there was damage in transit and you should contact us. The first step is to remove the guide rail assembly from within the enclosure. So I'll grab it with two hands, simply lift it up and sit it to the side. Next, we're going to grab the main enclosure itself. And there's a lip at the bottom of the enclosure, the red enclosure, that makes it really easy to grab. Grab the enclosure. You can put it on top of the box. Then we're going to cut the wire tie off of the guide rail assembly. Remove the user's manual. And you can remove the guide rail assembly from within its cardboard sleeve. Next, you'll want to remove the tape that's holding the guide rail assembly wiring harness to the bottom of the guide rail assembly. Hold the guide rail assembly by the handle that's on one end, making sure that this wire is drooping down the way it is here. The guide rail assembly then gets lowered into the enclosure, and there's a sticker on the bottom of the enclosure that shows you which ways the wheels should be oriented. They should be facing the direction you see here. There's a little Ziploc bag that's on the end of the guide rail assembly wiring harness to make sure that the connectors don't get caught in the slot in the enclosure. Slowly lower it into the enclosure. There's a guide rail setup pin on the opposite side of the guide rail assembly that's meant to make sure that the guide rail assembly doesn't fall down too low. We'll remove that later. Next, we're going to want to grab our accessory component box. You can remove the footballs. In between the two footballs, neatly packaged, is a carriage assembly. On the opposite side is a charger and two shafts. Unwrap the shafts from each other. We'll first insert the front guide rail shaft. It's the one that has the knob on it and the launch angle clip. Remove the launch angle clip by putting your two thumbs on these bottom ears here. It simply snaps off. We'll put that to the side. Insert the pointed end into the hole in the enclosure. And there is a little bit of resistance when it encounters the slot that's in the guide rail assembly. You can push it a little bit harder until it stops. Next, we'll grab the rear shaft and do the same thing. Threaded side goes in first, the end with a slot on the outside. Push it. You'll feel a little resistance also. Just give it a little bit more of a push. And those are inserted. We'll grab our slotted screwdriver and turn this shaft until it's beneath the outer surface of the outer enclosure, and I put it in until it's flush with this inner black assembly beneath the enclosure. Next, we're going to insert the clip back onto the front shaft that we took off. You'll notice there's a little stud inside of this that goes in that hole that's in the shaft. So we want to look down into this. You might have to loosen the knob up a little bit and push it in a little bit further like that. Make sure that the hole is oriented up and down, because this has to snap in onto the shaft in that direction. So I'm going to line this pin up here and then push. I actually had to push the shaft in just a little bit further, and then you hear that snap sound. So now both shafts are in place and where they need to be. The next step is to attach the guide rail assembly wiring harness to the control panel. In order to do that, we're going to loosen these 4 screws in the control panel with our Phillips screwdriver. Set the screws and the screwdriver to the side. Gently lift up the control panel, being careful so that the bottom printed circuit board doesn't come in contact with the outer enclosure. You can actually sit this upside down within the guide rail assembly so that you see the bottom of the printed circuit board on the control panel. Reach in the hole in the enclosure that the control panel came out from and grab the end of the wiring harness from the guide rail assembly. There's that Ziploc bag that I spoke about earlier. You want to remove the wire tie twisty from the bag. Remove the Ziploc bag and you'll see 2 color-coded connectors, one blue and one yellow. If you hold up the control panel, you'll notice that the mating connectors on the board are also color-coded. So we're first going to do the blue one, matching up blue to blue until we hear a click sound. And then we're going to do the one that looks like a telephone jack, yellow to yellow on this side. And again, you'll see how the yellow sides meet up. And that also clicks together. Very simple. We'll now grab the control panel and lower it back into the enclosure, being careful, again, that the PCB doesn't hit the enclosure. And we can put the 4 screws back in. The last step is to attach the carriage. Carriage is packaged in this bag that was in the lower cardboard box in between the 2 NERF footballs. Open the bag and unwrap the foam that's around the carriage. Put the carriage to the side. Using your Phillips screwdriver, we're going to remove the end cap that's on the guide rail assembly. There's 2 screws on either side. The end cap does fit snugly, so don't be afraid to put a little extra pressure on it. Put it to the side. Now we're going to grab our wiring harness for the carriage. It's taped to the inside of the guide rail assembly. So remove the tape. Grab its end, which also looks like a telephone jack. We want to attach it to the back of the carriage, and its mating plug is in the rear. It simply snaps in, and we're going to put one of the first coils of the wiring harness around this little tab. That helps to protect the wire. It's a strain relief so that if there's any force applied to the wire itself, it doesn't pull the plug out of the jack. So we're now ready to put the carriage onto the guide rail assembly. Notice the orientation. I have the cone facing forward towards the wheels because that's the direction that a ball will be placed. We're simply going to place the carriage on the back of the guide rail assembly. Okay, go to the front of the unit, open the battery door by simply pressing on this tab here, and we're going to connect the control panel to the battery. It too is color-coded like all of the connectors. You'll notice the red side of the connectors. They go together and there should be a snapping sound. Close the battery door by pressing this clasp here. Make sure that the speed control and the delay are both set to minimum. Press the power on button. You'll hear the launch wheels start spinning up to speed, and the launch button light will illuminate. Next, we're going to press the launch button, and that will cause the carriage motor to begin spinning, and the carriage should start advancing to the opposite end of the guide rail assembly. If the gear doesn't initially engage, you might have to give it a little bit of a nudge. So you see it made its full travel from one end to the other. The carriage is now properly engaged with the guide rail assembly. We can go ahead and turn the unit off and attach our end cap back to the guide rail assembly. It is a little tight, so you got to put a little pressure on it. You might want to even hit it with the back of your hand, like that. Take your 2 screws and reattach. The end cap. Okay, the last 2 steps are to insert the cap that covers the hole in the enclosure for the rear guide rail shaft into the enclosure. And this is really just decorative. It goes in that little hole there. And to remove the guide rail assembly setup pin that's in the back here. It's this little pin here. You won't need that again unless you take your unit apart and reassemble it, so you can discard that. And the ball cannon is fully assembled and ready to use. Tighten the knob on the front guide rail shaft to hold the guide rail assembly in place. That makes it easier to lift off of the box and to transport without the whole assembly sliding. So congratulations, we've just assembled a ball cannon in just a few easy steps, and it's ready to use.